Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of Module 3. We're still going to be going over masking, but we're going to get into some advanced techniques. Before we do the advanced techniques, we're actually going to review the techniques that we talked about last week. In addition to masking, we're also going to review transformation. We talked about transformation our very first week of class, where you scaled me down to fit the campus. And another important concept that we'll be talking about this week is how to organize your file. And we will also go over how to save copies of your file, as well as how to make copies of your layers. Sorry, I'm going to say it the right way. How to duplicate your layers within the file and outside of the file as well. So lots of concepts this week, but again, I think they're pretty intuitive, and I hope that you catch on quickly. These are concepts that we are going to use over and over again throughout this semester, so it's good to get practice in early on in the semester. So to start off, hopefully you guys have already downloaded the ArtSpace file that I uploaded on our class exercise. I've just opened it up here. And what I'd like all of us to do before we get started is I'm going to go ahead and save a copy of it. And I don't think we've done that before. So what we're going to do is first just check to see that you have ArtSpace JPEG, and then go up to File, and then Save As. And now we're going to go ahead and make a copy of it. So I'm going to put mine over in our digital graphics class, and it's still going to be in the class 3 folder. Again, yours could be a little bit different than mine. So here's my digital graphics, module 3. And then this one, I'm going to call this one ArtSpace SM. That stands for Select and Mask. So that's going to be one copy there. And then it's going to ask you a couple questions, and as long as the quality is set to 12 and maximum, you can go ahead and say OK. And now you can see that this file name has changed to artspacesm.jpg. We're going to go ahead and go up to File, Open Recent, and open up the first one as well. So we'll have ArtSpace JPEG and ArtSpace SM. Now, if I lost you anywhere, just like any other week, you can go ahead and pause, rewind, and go back. But go ahead and meet me here once you have both of the files opened, and we're going to be starting off by working on artspace.jpg. See you in just a minute. If you're ready to go, what I'm going to do is hit Command 0 or Control 0 so you can see it zoomed in full scale. Now that's a little bit big for me, so I'm going to go ahead and press the Alt button and then rollerball down. And remember, you can also do this by hitting Command or Control plus and minus. I want to get it nice and centered on the screen. I'll go ahead and call that good. And we've already saved the file, but what I'd like to do before we start working is first make sure that you are in your selection tool, or the move selection, and remember the shortcut for that is V. That's what your cursor should look like. And what we're going to do is organize our layer by giving our layers proper names. When you first start working in a project, even if it's small, it really helps you to know what layer you're working on by giving it a unique name that's more specific, other than like layer 1, layer 2, the generic names. And it's really easy to change a layer name. What you can do is just double click on the layer name. So again, Photoshop is really picky. You have to do it right on the layer name, not on the thumbnail or anything like that. Now, when I double clicked on it, did you see that instead of changing the layer name, it says new layer? So the reason why it's not letting me change the name yet, I'm going to hit cancel, is because we've got this little lock right here. So what we can do is simply click on that lock, and it unlocks the layer for us. Now, if you try to double click on the layer name, you'll see that it automatically highlights and we can change the name. So I'm going to call this layer ArtSpace, and then enter. And I'm going to do that one more time just so you can see. All I do is double click. I don't have to hit backspace. I don't have to put my cursor there. I just start typing and Photoshop knows what to do. So save yourself the trouble of moving your mouse, hitting backspace, anything like that. It knows what to do. So now we've got a new layer called Art Space, and we're going to do essentially what we did last week. We are going to mask out a portion of this image. So let me tell you a little bit about this image. This was an image taken by a photographer for an architectural firm that I used to work for called MJSA. And this is the Art Space building in downtown Salt Lake City. And what I like to do in this particular photo is I want to actually put in a better sky. I'm not sure what happened here, but it looks like it was a slightly overcast day and it just added way too much contrast in the sky. So to make it look better, I want to mask the sky and then pull in a new one. So by the time we're done with this exercise, just this portion of the exercise, we are going to mask these buildings. Sorry, we're going to mask the sky so we just see these buildings. And then what we're going to do is pull in a new sky together. And then after that, we are going to do the advanced selection method where we select the building or we mask the building together. But then it'll be up to you to find your own sky to pull into the exercise. What I'd like to do now is open up the two sky files in the exercise that I provided to you, 2A and 2B. I'm going to go ahead and open those. So now we can see we've got sky 2B and sky 2A. Now looking at my screen, if I do a Control-0 on both of them, I think even in the recorded lecture, you can see a pretty big difference between these two files. And I'm wondering if you know what the difference between these two files are. Let me also tell you that I went online and I searched for a sky, and then I downloaded two different images. Let me zoom out just a little bit. So hopefully you can tell that they are the same image, but the quality between the two of them is really different. So here's the difference. On one of them, when I did my Google image search, I downloaded the thumbnail, and then on the second image search, I actually downloaded the whole sky. So this is just a little test and a little practice for you guys to see the big difference between saving a thumbnail versus saving the entire sky. So which one would you assume that we're using for Art Space? Hopefully you're correct to assume that we're using sky 2A and not sky 2B. But we will eventually be bringing in both of them so you can even see the difference within the image. Okay, let me hop back to Art Space. So remember, to get started, we are going to first mask the sky out of the scene, and we need to do that by selecting the tops of these buildings. Now this can get a little bit tricky because there's lots of detail in here. I don't want to lose any of these beautiful roof tiles on the edges, and then in addition to that, I don't want to lose the satellite or the ladder or the light fixture over here. Now we have our really easy object selection tool. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that. Now, I did that really quickly, but when I first started, let me back up a little bit. When I first started, see how it's giving me that no, you can't do anything? The reason why it's doing that is I don't have a layer selected to work on. But as soon as I click on Art Space, now it knows, okay, this is the layer you want to select from. So I'm going to come over here from the left side and drag down. And let's see how it does. Okay, it does a pretty good job, but do you see how it totally forgot this building back here? We've got some weird edges. So as a review from last week, when you hold the Shift button, you can go ahead and add to that selection. So I'm going to try to keep adding these cars. You know, it's still struggling. Our object selection tool not doing a great job today. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to hit Command D or Control D to deselect. We're going to do most of this manually. So what I can do now is I can switch to the Quick Selection tool, and I'm going to put my cursor right here and just do a quick review. So if you don't have your caps lock on, you can see a preview of the brush. When I turn caps lock on, you can see it's the plus sign, it's a target. So make sure caps lock is off. And then again, if you use the two solid brackets that are just above the return key on your keyboard, you can make your brush size smaller or larger. Now, because we have so many fine details, I don't want to go too large. Let me show you what happens if I go too large. So coming up here, if I click, do you see that it starts to get a whole bunch of the sky? Let me hit Control D. Even if I kind of bring it closer, it does a good job, but I like to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to hit Control D, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to go ahead and try to grab the edges. Again, you might have a different preference here. You might want to go right in with your poly lasso tool. You could be the one person who actually likes the magnetic lasso tool. I'm not sure. And you can see I kind of just messed up back there. So before I get too far, I can even right now hold the Alt key down and subtract this area from my selection. And by default, it's still the plus sign, so I can keep adding. And when I work, I like to hold my mouse down, but I've also seen people just come through and do like a ton of clicks. They don't like to hold their mouse down, they just kind of click through. Okay, so right now I'm really just focused on the tops of the buildings. And you can do this in several steps. Like right here, because this is a nice straight line, I am actually going to come over to my selection tools and switch to the poly lasso. I can do that, but remember, in order to add it, I need to hit the shift so that it knows that it's adding. If I just start, do you see that it either moves it or it deselects what you just had? Now don't freak out if either one happens. You can always hit escape. And as soon as you hit escape, it'll bring back that old selection. And now you can hit shift, and I'm going to add this building here, this little bit here. I'm going to come back and do the satellite and the ladder separately, just because those are so fine. I'm just going to do the overall trace right now. Okay, and that is the edge of my building. And this is going to be really weird, but while I'm here, I'm just going to draw a giant outline around the sides of the building so it gets all of the sides. Now when I get to the top, I can click, and it doesn't end it yet, so I'm going to double click. And it added most of it, it just missed this little area right here. So remember to add, what do you hit? Shift or Alt? So it should be Shift. That gives you that little plus sign. And I need to add this portion of it as well. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. Now before I add this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and put on my mask. And there we go. It masked out the sky. Now sometimes when you first start working in Photoshop, let's say you accidentally did the opposite. So instead of tracing along the bottom of the building, you were actually selecting the top of the sky. No big deal. As long as you have your mask selected, if you hit Command I or Control I, that inverts your selection. So you can toggle back and forth between those and not worry about losing your work. Okay, before we finish up the traditional way, I am going to hit the slash so that we can kind of see a preview of what has been masked. And what I want to do is I want to be able to add in all of the little details that I left out the first time. So what I like to do is on my mask, you can actually right click on it and, sorry, let me turn this red part back on. You can actually right click and go to disable layer mask. Now that's really different than deleting it. What it does is it leaves the mask, so it preserves it, but it turns it off so you can see the parts of the image that haven't been masked yet. Now you can even hit the slash key again above the return symbol, and you can decide if you like the kind of red preview on or off. For me, the red is really helpful because it obviously shows, okay, this stuff wasn't included in the mask. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to zoom in again, and we're going to select this stuff. And again, I really like the quick selection tool, and I might even need to make it a little bit, my brush a little bit smaller. So I'm going to grab the satellite. Oh, that doesn't, I'm going to make it even smaller. The smaller you make it, the less pixels it grabs, so it can really get around that circle. I might have to clean it up. You can see that it's not perfect right here. So I'm going to hit Alt to subtract, and I'm just going to try to get rid of those extra little pixels. And again, depending on what you did last week, you might be doing this whole thing using the poly lasso tool. So what I can do now that I have this selected, now that I have that extra part selected, this is kind of a review from last week as well. I kind of ruined the word review, sorry, review. Last week we talked about the most basic concept of masking. If you want to add or subtract something from a mask, it is controlled by color. So if I want to add or take this out, what I need to do is add color over this area. So right now, because it's not visible, this part of the selection is black. And to make it visible again, I need to make it white. So remember, the shortcut to toggle my colors is what key? X. And then what I can do is use the brush command or the gradient tool. I usually use the paint bucket. So that's G for paint bucket. And when I fill this in, you can see that now I can see it. The other thing that's cool about a mask selection is if I click outside of it, see how nothing is happening? That's because it only works within the area that I've selected. Same thing with the brush. So if I take my brush and I click out here, you can see how huge it is. It doesn't do anything. But if I come in here, you can see, let me change the color to black. It'll only do that area. Okay, so that's one thing that's really nice about the selection tool. So I'm going to switch it back to white, switch it back to G for gradient, and I pulled this back in. Now when I hit undo, you can see that there's still a little bit right here that should be brushed back in. This brush is huge, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's make sure I got our soft pressure. Whoops, way too big again. There we go. Can you see these little red pixels here? I want to paint those white so those don't accidentally disappear. Okay. And now what I'd like to do is move on to this railing. This is where I'm going to let the poly lasso shine. I'm actually just going to come in and basically try to trace this the best I can. And you can decide like how thick you want these pixels to be. You can come in really tight. I'm going to keep a little bit of that like feather that's going on outside of it. We'll see how it looks. I hope you can hear how much I'm clicking. Trying to get it as straight as possible. If you want it super straight, if you hold the shift key down, it makes it so that everything has to be straight. So now I'm holding the shift key down, except this one does angle down a little bit. But if I hold shift, it goes straight up. I let it go, I can angle back down. I hold the shift key again, it goes straight up. You can see if I just hold the shift key once, it makes it go straight, but then I can let go and have it be angled again. Okay, so here's this selection. And again, the point of this is to make it visible again. So I'm going to go back to my paint bucket tool, which is G for gradient. And I'm just going to spill white in here. And then Control D to deselect. And that looks pretty good, I think. I have no idea where I went. I'm zoomed in so far. Okay, last but not least, we've got this shade right here. I'm going to try and mix quick selection with the poly lasso. Coming in really small, just kind of feathering it out. I think that looks pretty good. I may have gotten too big there, so I'm going to hit Alt and subtract those last little pixels. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit L to switch to lasso, Shift to add to my selection, and I'm actually holding the Shift key down so I can get a really nice straight line. And I have to close this, so I'm going to double click, or that time it's just a single click. Now that I've got it selected, again, gradient, I can spill it in there, Control D. Now let's zoom out and see how that looks. So this time I'm going to go ahead and enable my mask. And that's what it looks like. Okay. If I want to turn off the preview, I can go ahead and hit the slash key so you can see what it looks like. So that gets rid of the sky background. Now in the next part, what we're going to do is pull in those two skies. So this is a great place to pause, go back and clean up your work, and then we can move on to duplicating the skies. I'll see you guys back here in just a minute. All right, moving on. So we've got our art space layer, and now what I'd like to do is pull in these two skies just for our exercise. When you work on the other file, the art space SM, you will be pulling in your own sky image. But just for the exercise, I've provided these two files for you. So let me show you two ways of duplicating layers. One of them is within the layer, and then another one is from layer to layer. So to begin, I am going to drag this layer to art space. And we do that by first make sure you're in V, just to be sure. And I want you to grab anywhere on the gray area or even the thumbnail image of this layer. So grab and hold, so it's a click and hold. And then what you want to do is hover over the file that you want to move it into, and then drag it down to the workspace area. And then as soon as you let go, it places it in that image. So what I can do is actually drag this down so that it's out of the way. Let's do that one more time with the small file. Actually, I'll do it one more time with the big file too. Let me delete that. Delete it, yes. Okay, so click and hold. You can see it turns into a little fist. And then drag over the name of where you want to drop it. Pull it down to the workspace area and then let go. Okay, then what we're going to do is drag it behind so that it's behind it. And this isn't layer 1 now. Let's call this sky background. Okay, let's do it one more time with the other sky. Let's see how this looks in our file. But with this one, I'm going to show you a different technique. We're not going to use the drag technique. What we're going to do this time is right click. We're going to go to duplicate layer. And then you can see that it asks what you want it to be named. We'll just keep it background copy. But this time we get to select the document it's going into. So you can duplicate it in the current document, that's what it's set to by default, or you can change it to a different one. So we want this to go into art space. Then we click on OK. So now if I go to art space, you can see here is the other background layer. So there's the first one, and here's the second one. I'm going to keep this one as background because we will be deleting this one here in just a minute. So again, this is just to show you what happens if you download a thumbnail. And I'm going to turn sky background off. You guys can just watch this part of it and can follow along if you'd like. But I'm going to first transform this to fit because it's just weird to have a little sky. So if I hit Command T or Control T, I can grab the sky and essentially scale it to fit the background. So I just grab these points right here, or any point along that line. And you can find a portion of the sky that you like. I love these colors, so I'm going to move it up a little bit. And then when you're done, hit Enter. And look at how pixelated this is. It looks like part of downtown is like a 16-bit game or something like that. So don't ever use thumbnails off the internet. Make sure you grab high-resolution images. And this is where a lot of heartache and disappointment comes because sometimes the perfect image isn't available in high resolution. So my answer to that is it's not the perfect image because it isn't the perfect resolution, so find a different one. I'm going to drag this down to the trash to delete it. And on yours, it might warn you, like a warning might come up, like, are you sure you want to delete this layer? I've turned that off, that warning. I think I clicked on do not ask me next time or something like that, just because I'm constantly deleting layers. So now let's turn on this little eyeball and hit Control T again. And let's figure out how big this is. And I actually need to zoom out because did you see that when I was zoomed in where I was before, when I hit Control T, you can't even see the grip points? That's because this file is so much bigger than this one that we kind of have the opposite problem. So now go ahead and transform and move it so that we get that beautiful kind of orange sky. I think this looks great. I'll do something like that right there. And then again, when you're done, hit Enter. And then we've got this beautiful sky background right here. I think that looks pretty good. So for this exercise, we're going to call it good here, and then we're going to move on to the second part where we are going to look at advanced selection methods. So go ahead and hit Command or Control S. That will automatically save it for you, and this time we have ArtSpace PSD, and I'm going to put that in Module 3 because remember, to get credit for the assignment, I need the PSD to take a look at your file and verify your layer organization. And then I also need a copy of your JPEG. So File, Save As, or Command or Control Shift S. And then here under Format, it still is ArtSpace. We want to save that as a JPEG. Save. And then it's just verifying that we want the maximum. We always want the maximum. And then we can hit OK. So I'm going to record part 2 as a separate file in case you need to take a break. I've been going for about 30 minutes. You may have been going a little bit longer, just depending on your pauses, your breaks, and your rewinds. So come on back for part 2.